This is episode 62 of the Life in Norway show. On a recent trip to Svalbard, I caught up with Peter Betlam, who has lived on the Arctic archipelago on and off for 6 years, and is currently working towards a PhD in Arctic geology. We talk about the science that takes place in the high Arctic, as well as what life is like in such a unique part of the world. You can find out more information on the show notes page at lifeinnorway.net/podcast. Just look for episode 62. Happy listening. I'm joined today by Peter Betlam from the University Centre here in Svalbard. He's originally from Kenya and has lived in many countries around the world and has now lived in Svalbard for several years as well. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
The first question I always ask is what brought you to Norway in the first place? But in this case, I need to ask what brought you to Svalbard in the first place?
Well, in this case, I actually must say I came here first as a student. So I was actually just searching for the most remote place to study on Google. And at least 6-7 years ago, they would show up with 3 different options, being either New Zealand, Fairbanks, or in this case, Svalbard. And then looking through the course catalog, you actually had a course here as Arctic Safety. They still offer it. And they teach you how to shoot. They teach you how to use pyrotechnics to scare away polar bears. Teach you how to do glacier rescues, crevasse training, sea ice rescue. And having seen that safety course, that's actually the main reason why I then came to Svalbard.
So why were you looking for a remote place?
By that time, I'd been in Europe for a couple of years, but very much realized that you can leave Africa, but Africa will never really leave you. So in that sense, looking for a place that sort of resembles the remoteness of Africa, like the living day by day, that is very difficult to find in Europe. I was looking for that in the most remote place. So in that sense, that's the reason why I was looking for a possibility of leaving the hectic Western world and try to settling down and study in a slightly slower paced place.
Now, Peter, we know each other through work, and up until a few minutes ago, I just assumed you're a Scandinavian, and I couldn't be more wrong. So just tell us a little bit about your life story.
Yeah, so born and grown up in East Africa, where my parents were setting up national parks. Since then, I've gone on to finish high school in Europe, in the UK, and in the Netherlands. Then ended up doing chemistry at university level in the Netherlands and the UK, in which I spent, I think, 1.5 years in London and 1.5 years in a small city in the Netherlands called Nijmegen. I took a gap year after the undergrad, went back to Kenya, spent a couple of months in Iceland. Since on my mom's side, they're Norwegians, the family is. And I'd always promised mom that I would learn a Scandinavian language before I turned 25. And me being me, decided to go for Icelandic because it's one of the languages that isn't compatible with Norwegian. So after that was also when I made up my mind I wanted to come to Svalbard, because that was the year I was Googling where to go next. I went back to the Netherlands for a year of master's degree in chemistry and spent the rest of this master's degree in Svalbard as an exchange student. So that was 2015, 2016 when I came here first. Went back briefly to Iceland to study sustainable energy sciences before realizing that if you come from a remote place as Svalbard and you go to Iceland, that Iceland can be pretty tame, pretty civilized, pretty right there in Europe. So within like half a year after leaving Svalbard and going to Iceland, I actually came back to Svalbard, started my studies here, and then caught on as a PhD student afterwards, and I've been here since.
Tell us about the University Centre in general. What kind of courses are on offer here, and then let's hear a bit more about what you do specifically.
Yeah, so University Centre in Svalbard is actually it's not necessarily a university. It's one of these remote outposts or like educational outposts in which all Norwegian universities have come together to offer high quality and high level field courses in how to deal with field work and science and education in the high Arctic. So it's 78 degrees north, but there's cruises and expeditions going up to 80 degrees north, in which the students that are that come up here are being taught how to behave in such an extreme environment. Like we have temperatures of down to -30, -40 Celsius. We have a dark season as it is right now. That means it's a couple of months of pure darkness, which really brings everyone to the limits of what they can handle out in the field. And above that, we have polar bears. So being able to deal with such a wide variety of different circumstances under pressure and then still being able to get your research done, that is what the University Centre in Svalbard is about. We have about 4 different departments focusing on Arctic biology, Arctic technology, Arctic geophysics, Arctic geology. And more recently, we've gone into Arctic Safety Centre, which actually tries to mitigate climate change effects as they're happening. Like, since the Arctic is warming up much faster than elsewhere, we can actually study this climate change as it's happening here and then extrapolate to how it's going elsewhere. But things that we've noticed here is that slopes are becoming more unstable. So we've had not only more avalanches in winter, we also have like rock falls and rock slides in summer. So those are the things that are actually being studied here. But then the other departments are looking at sea ice conditions, how the sea ice thickens, thins in summer, how much snow we get. And since we're so far north here, we actually have the Arctic geophysics department looking at space observations that you could not do anywhere else. Like, for example, instead of just having northern lights here during the night, we also have them during the day because we have 24/7 darkness. So these are some of the unique possibilities that UNIS has and that we are very much well positioned for to actually study and get the grips on how things work.
And how about your study specifically? And I think the listeners will be particularly interested in the weeks you've just spent offshore on a research vessel.
Yeah, so I fit in here in the Arctic Geology Center, or like in the Department of Arctic Geology, where actually I've been working on the Longyearbyen CO2 lab. So it's some drill sites we have, like 2 drill sites around town that we have here, in which in the past we've tried to figure out whether we can store carbon in the subsurface. So just to put that in context, we've got the coal mines, we have got the town with the coal-fired power plant, and we've got this CO2 storage site all within like a 10-kilometer radius, which makes it a perfect pilot case study of where we can learn how to properly store CO2. But then last summer, I spent a bit over 2 months on a research vessel, the JOICE Resolution, with the IODP, which is the International Ocean Discovery Program, in which we were actually drilling basaltic rocks, like magmatic rocks or lavas in the Norwegian Sea, just off the shore of Norway, to assess whether we can put CO2 into those rocks as well. And these are actually very similar rocks to the rocks we have in Iceland, where tests have shown that if you pump down CO2 into those rocks, it takes up to a couple of years and the CO2 actually solidifies into mineral. Everything is at the testing stage, but right now it's just seeing how everything goes and whether we can actually manage to store some of the CO2 in rocks. Because if that ends up working, then we have quite a bit of this kind of rock around the globe. And we actually have a very nice possibility to using these kind of resources to put CO2 from the atmosphere back into the rocks.
So I'm going to drag you away from the science for a minute and return to life here in Longyearbyen. We're here right now in the dark time, as you said, and I think the big difference is if you've been in mainland Norway during the winter, it's still light for a couple of hours during the day, even though the sun doesn't rise. Here, it's absolutely not like that at all. It is pitch black 24/7. You get some light from the moon. You might get the northern lights in the sky, but that's pretty much it. And it's, of course, the other extreme in the summer, where the sun is in the sky all day. You've been here for several cycles now, several years. How do you cope with such extremes?
Well, actually, I don't think they're so extreme. I think if anything, it's much nicer not having any sunlight than being tortured by 3 or 4 hours of sunlight that you're going to miss because you'll be sitting in your office. So by having the fact that we don't have any sunlight whatsoever for pretty much all of November, December, January, and part of February, means that we don't actually miss it that much.
I think I see what you're getting at, but wouldn't you prefer 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness every day?
Yeah, I would, but that's how I grew up in East Africa, and that's super nice. Like having a transition from daytime to nighttime in 15, 20 minutes is amazing. But I think the alternative is much harsher. Like, I really have I personally have like problems with adjusting to this increasingly long days in which you still have a couple of hours of dark. So I would actually make the argument here, make the case here that it's this transition zone. Maybe you have it a bit shorter in Norway than you have it here. But for example, from beginning of March, all of March, some days we actually have up to 1.5 hours that our days get longer or shorter in autumn. And that transition zone is actually the harshest of the year. As a geologist, however, or at least in the archaeology department, the toughest period has not so much to do with the length of the days, but rather that we have permanent days in summer, which means by then most of the snow is actually gone. We can actually see the rocks, which means that from the end of May all the way until end of September, many of us spend months and months and months outside. So the dark season is actually the first moment we can relax, sit back, have a drink in a pub, and not have to worry about doing polar bear protection around our tents because we're no longer in the field.
So Longyearbyen here on Svalbard is pretty much the furthest north you can easily get to in the world on a commercial flight, and anyone can move here and visit here fairly easily. It's expensive to get here, but it's easy to get here. 2,500 people live here, more or less. There's a university centre. There's a lot of administration support services. There's the science and research, as we said, and of course the tourism industry. People might think this is some remote outpost, and it kind of is. It's remote, but half an hour ago we were in a coffee shop that was full. They make their own chocolates. They hand make sandwiches. We're now sitting in the foyer of a Radisson, a worldwide hotel chain. This could be anywhere in the world right now. So what is Longyearbyen? Tell us how you see this town, this community.
I've always seen it as being Africa and Europe, in the sense that it's sure, we have all the luxuries of Europe. We have when non-corona times we've had up to 10 daily flights a day, just going to the mainland, going to Tromsø, going to Oslo. We have posts coming up every single day of the week, maybe not over the weekends, but at least in working days. And we've got a very large, even like increased in size shopping center, which is almost a shopping mall. A dozen or so pubs and restaurants. So to really call this is an outpost may not be like the truest interpretation of the word outpost. On the other hand, we had someone being eaten by a polar bear just last year on the camping grounds here in town. So it's a very fine line between the luxuries we have here and still being in a harsh environment. And I think that's actually one of the most striking things about living here, is that you have this very fine balance. And automatically, you're no longer really, at least for me, I'm no longer as stressed as I would be living in a big city elsewhere. Because you have the nature around you. You have these more wilderness or like wild feelings that you have constantly being reminded of, that you're in nature. And you have to respect nature for that. So as a result, you live much more day by day, and days are much more relaxed.
Peter, I think a lot of tourists who come to Svalbard are here for the polar bears, whether they intend to see one or expect to see one, or just through the mystique or the fear of living somewhere where you could have a polar bear come down the street. As you say, there was an incident recently at the airport last year where someone lost their life, and it's certainly not the only one in recent years. You've been here for 6 years now. Do you have any encounter stories personally?
Well, that depends on what you define with encounter. But we've had polar bears up to maybe 25, 30 meters away, just passing by and really just minding their own business, not caring about us. And now we've had polar bears when we were out in the field, just zigzagging into their typical hunting, attacking pattern, walking over the plains where we just walked, even though we'd already gone up the mountaintop or mountainside. But luckily for us, never had any encounters, and we actually had to fire a shot. So in that sense, I would say, I haven't had any encounter, but I've had the honor and the privilege of actually seeing these apex predators roaming around town, roaming around the wilderness, roaming around their natural habitat, and being part of that.
Living in such a small place for 6 years, is this the kind of place where everyone knows your name?
Maybe not your name, but they know who you are. I think right now I've got my red beanie on. Usually I'm carrying an orange one, so usually people would recognize me by my orange beanie. But yeah, people do know who you are, even though they may not know your name.
Is that a good thing?
In general, I wouldn't see a problem with it. It at least gives you this feeling that it's everyone knows one another, and everyone is, in principle, out there to help you out in case you really need it. I think that's very important. Sure, you have small town vibes, which means you have small town rumors, and nothing is really private in this town. But can that really be said for a bigger town? Sure, you blend better in, but by now social media are everywhere, and it's not that difficult finding out more information about people that way either.
So, Peter, I can hear from how you're talking that you're very dedicated to the science that you do, and I think anyone who's here beyond a semester is absolutely here because they love what it is they do. But you're not doing science 24/7, 365 days a year. So how do you keep yourself entertained here in Longyearbyen when you're off work?
Well, for one, the obvious thing is you can go skiing pretty much half the year. Snow's not always the best, but at least we have snow. Most of us have snow scooters or snowmobiles, in which you can pretty much drive all around the island. Besides that, we've got ice climbing. We've got some beautiful ice caves in the glaciers. Plenty of beautiful hikes you can do in summer. Though I do actually know that there's actually quite some people in town that never go out. Because one of the benefits that we have here is that we've got these massive satellite dishes that provide most of the satellite imagery data to the rest of the world. So, for example, these kind of weather data, much of it comes from here, downloaded here. And that automatically means we've got very, very, very high-speed internet. So we've got quite a good gaming community up here as well that are using this high-speed network node to more or less interact with all the games that they can be playing and enjoying themselves like that. So it's not uncommon that when you walk up the street to the pub that we were just sitting at, you could actually see some people down the road, they're playing Pokemon Go and trying to fight their way through and getting some of the milestones in town.
That is something I've never really heard about before. I have heard you have fast internet here, but that's truly fascinating. This could be like anywhere else on Earth.
Exactly.
Great. Peter, what's next for you? You're coming to the end of a PhD now. Do you see your future here on Svalbard or somewhere else?
Well, I've got 1.5 years left, so it gives me plenty of time to really think about that. If anything, having been on this Joyous Resolution drill ship and drilling for 2 consecutive months to do like high level science, it's like the highest level science you can do, really made me interested in pursuing that kind of exciting activities in the future as well. But whether that's going to be in industry or whether it's going to be in academia, maybe here even at UNIS or in Oslo or in Trondheim or Tromsø, or even outside of Norway, I'm not really too sure yet. I've lived in many, many different places so far. And as long as the place, the people you're working with, and the topic are interesting, I don't see why that would not be an option.
Peter, thanks for joining me today. I know you've had a busy weekend and you're about to head off and play ice hockey with some of the local school children. So I won't keep you too much longer, but before I let you go, I have to ask you the same 3 questions I ask every guest, tweaked slightly in favour of Svalbard today. So what is the best thing about living here on Svalbard?
Oh, that's a tough one because there's so many good things. I would actually go with the fact that it's a relaxed way of living. So you don't have these stresses.
And the most challenging thing?
The most challenging thing is also perhaps the most rewarding thing, and that is that you have a 4-month-long field day in summer, which gives you amazing results for your scientific career, but completely drains you out of energy. And then recovering from that into the dark season, that can be a challenge. Even though you live day by day, and that's a super nice thing to do, it can be challenging to take the day off because there's just so much nice stuff around.
And the final question, your favourite place on Svalbard?
I like the East Coast, but actually I think the West Coast, there's some very nice glaciers south of East Shore Radio, which is like one of these radio station outposts, where also tourists can go. But you've got beautiful scenery down there with the glaciers calving, nice snow and sometimes a polar bear passing by. So I would say that is probably West Coast of Svalbard is my favorite winter locality.
Great. Peter, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.